Hello everyone, welcome to another Topinion on the Top Chat podcast channel. My name's Matt and it's just me today. I'm going to be talking about a game series that is very dear to my heart. I think I said that in the last video actually. It's Pokemon, as you've seen from the title and the description and the thumbnail and blah blah blah, all the rest of it. Specifically, I'm going to give my opinion, because that's kind of the point of all these videos, about which generation and which games specifically are the best. The things I'm going to be covering in this video are setting, starters, legendaries, overall Pokemon designs, and then the additional features that each game introduced. I'm going to go through those topics, pick my favourites from each one, and then at the end I will surmise and kind of pick my favourite generation. I already know which generation is my favourite overall, but I don't for the individual subjects that I'm covering. I've made notes, but I haven't actually decided in my head which one I think is the best of each. So that's something that I'm just kind of going to do on the fly, but I do know the end result because, I mean, it's my opinion. So stick around for that. But for now, let's get started with the settings of each game. Starting, of course, from the beginning where it makes sense, Generation 1, and we have Kanto. Kanto is a cool place. It's a bit confusing, to be honest. I recently went back through Generations 1, 2 and 3 just for a nostalgia trip, and Generation 1 confused the hell out of me. I don't know if that's because, you know, I've since played the later games. You know, the most recent time before this that I played Gen 1 was Fire Red and Leaf Green, which is, God, about 15 years ago now. So maybe it's because I've been playing the more recent games. Kanto to me just seemed very confusing. There were a couple of places where I genuinely got stuck. Maybe because I was trying to kind of speedrun the game. But anyway, Kanto, it's got a lot of variety. It's got some water routes. Cinnabar Island in particular is probably my favourite place on the whole game. But it's okay. It's not bad, I think, overall. Just not bad. Moving on to Johto. Pretty much same again. I like the fact that they expanded and included Kanto and Johto in the Generation 2 games. However, Johto as a setting is still kind of a bit meh, which is then when we move on to Hoenn. Now, Hoenn is an interesting one because many people, as is that famous IGN review, many people complain that Hoenn was far too water-based and there were too many water routes, and blah blah blah, but for me, I think that's kind of integral to the plot of the game. The whole point of Generation 3 and Ruby and Sapphire is this battle between land and sea, which is why a lot of the game is based on water routes. But then if you think of the northern part of the map, a lot of the setting up there is very volcanic and ashy, which is Team Magma's kind of deal throughout the game, is that they want to expand on land mass. So it does make sense within the theme of the game to have a lot of water-based routes and a lot of sort of ashy volcanic-based routes. So me personally, I like Hoenn. Sinnoh is very pretty. It's kind of just an amalgamation of the previous 3 games, but I do really like the underground. Unova, Generation 5, is a much more contemporary setting. The first game to be modelled outside of Japan. It's based on New York City, as we all know. Castelia City is the kind of obvious pinpoint for that, and the bridge to get there, of course, being like the Brooklyn Bridge. Yeah, it's kind of New York City to a T, but it is very cool. Kalos, now this is a difficult one because I have admittedly never actually played X and Y, but I've seen a lot of it, I know a lot about it, and I like the French-inspired star-shaped design of the map. I think it looks very cool. And finally, Alola, which is clearly Hawaii, or, you know, the Pokemon Company's take on Hawaii. It's very pretty, it's very green, very yellow, very blue, everything looks really lush, and it has a very cool, like, island hopping thing. For my favourite location in Pokemon games, I'm actually going to go for Generation 5 and say Unova. The starters, now, Generation 1, they're classic, they're hard to complain about, they're very good designs, they kind of set the tone for Pokemon in general. Moving on to Generation 2, personally I think Chikorita and Chikorita's line, Bayleaf and Meganium, are the best, well, Chikorita alone and that evolution line is the best starter Pokemon in the whole of Pokemon so far. Don't at me. Actually, at me, at Top Chat Podcast on Twitter. Feraligatr and Typhlosion, kind of, they're okay, I guess. I like that Typhlosion now shoots flames out of its neck. Just a cool little addition. Generation 3, I like everything but Blaziken. How the hell did Torchic go from being so cute and small and innocent? And then Combusken just literally looks like a kind of weird bipedal, well, I suppose chickens are bipedal, but anyway, yeah, just a weird angry chicken. And then Blaziken, I don't know, I just really don't like Blaziken, but I like the other two. Generation 4 I think is much better all round, and actually the best design since Generation 1. Moving on to Black and White. Embor. What the hell is Embor? I like Samurott, I like Serperia, but Embor, as far as I'm concerned, can go die in a hole. Generation 6, I think Chespin's line is absolutely terrible. I hate all three of Chespin, the middle thing, and then Chesnaught. I think they're just absolutely terrible, but I do like the other two. And finally, Sun and Moon. I think Rowlet and Rowlet's line is great. I love Litten, I like Torracat, but I really don't like that Incineroar is bipedal. Why do they not just leave it on all fours? And I can't stand the Popplio line. I think Popplio is really cute, but then Brionne is just hideous, and Primarina doesn't really save it. The main issue for me there is Brionne. I'd probably say Generation 4. I really like Generation 4. I think all three are very consistent. But yeah, shout out again Chikorita for being the best overall. Moving on, Legendaries. So I might kind of blur the lines here between Legendaries and Mythicals and Pseudo Legendaries, but kind of just let me off. I didn't really want to go into the real semantics of Pokemon. I'm just picking out the ones that are considered Legendaries and are, you know, banned in VGC or restricted in VGC, and so on and so forth. So, Generation 1. Personally, I think Mew is a bit underwhelming. Mewtwo is cool, and the birds are brilliant, so Zapdos, Moltres and Articuno. Articuno is my favourite of the three. Generation 2, Ho-Oh is basically Moltres but a little bit cooler. Lugia is really elegant, and the dogs are just as good as the Gen 1 birds, so for me that's an improvement. Generation 3, I think the Regis are kind of okay, but I don't like the fact that Registeel, Regirock and then Regice, I don't like the fact that their names don't line up. That's just a really nitpicky thing, but it does annoy me. I think Groudon and Kyogre both look cool, but are unbalanced. Kyogre is clearly the more powerful choice of the two because, you know, ground is weak to water and it's just obvious. But Rayquaza is or Rayquaza, however you want to say it, is the best legendary. End of story. Generation 4, Diamond and Pearl. The Psychic trio of Uxie, Azelf and Mesprit are a bit weird to me because they kind of cancel each other out. They all pretty much do the same thing. They look cool, but meh is my overall feeling. I don't like Palkia at all. I think Palkia looks hideous, but Dialga is the total opposite. I really like Dialga's design. And then, Giratina, that's what it's called. I almost forgot the name. Yeah, Giratina or Giratina looks really, really cool. So I like Dialga and Giratina, but not Palkia. Moving on now, Unova, Generation 5, Black and White. This is gonna take a while. So, the Swords of Justice of Cobalion, Terrakion, Virizion, they are all great. I love the three of those, but Keldeo kind of brings down the Swords of Justice quadruple set for me. I like those first three, but Keldeo is just a horse that's blue. The Forces of Nature, being Thundurus, Tornadus and Landorus, I think they all look really good in their incarnate form, but the Therian forms are all a bit weird. Landorus looks okay, but the other two I think look a bit strange. The designs overall are kind of weird. They look just really removed from everything else that Pokemon have designed so far. However, it is saved by Reshiram, Zekrom and Kyurem that I all think look really good, especially Reshiram, just a really elegant fiery dragon. I love White Heat. I think that's just like a really cool concept, and they nail it with Reshiram. Moving on to Generation 6, Hooper can just get to I really don't like Hooper, sorry for swearing, but yeah, I don't know what else to say. I don't like Hooper in any of its forms, just not for me. Xerneas and Yveltal are both really cool. I think they both look really cool in my opinion. And Zygarde is a nice idea, but it looks a bit underwhelming, especially at its complete form, or the 100% thing, whatever it's called. It looks a bit too much like a Digimon. And also, how the hell does it go from a dog to a snake to a kind of big, weird Digimon robot looking giant thing? I don't know, it doesn't really make much sense to me. But just to go back and touch on Xerneas and Yveltal, I really like the kind of light and dark contrast between those two. I would say Xerneas is probably my second favourite legendary behind Rayquaza overall. Generation 7, Sun and Moon, I think the Tapus are all brilliant, all four of them look great, they've all got their unique kind of little twists in the design that really complement their styles and their typings. I I can't decide whether I prefer Solgaleo or Lunala, which I think is a good thing, and I also like that the Pokemon Company weren't afraid to throw in a legendary twist by having Cosmog evolve into Cosmoem, and then Lunala or Solgaleo, depending on which version of the game you had. I thought that was a neat little twist that Generation 7 really stood out for. Now, a kind of a tricky one is with the Ultra Beasts, because are they legendaries or are they in a class of their own? I kind of feel like they're in a class of their own, so I don't want to touch on them too much, but overall I think they're really hit and miss. I think Nihilego, for example, looks great, but then you have Buzzwole, which I absolutely cannot stand. Overall, I would say the best generation for legendaries is Generation 2, because the 2 birds, Ho-Oh and Lugia, and then the 3 dogs all look really different from each other, but are all equally great designs. Moving on to overall Pokemon designs. Now, Generation 1, here's a hot take that's going to be somewhat controversial. I think the Generation 1 designs are extremely overrated. I think people look back on Gen 1 with nostalgia glasses on and they think, oh, Gen 1's the best, they'll never beat it. But let's face it, Magnemite is a magnet, Grimer is a pile of sludge, as is Muck, Voltorb is just a Pokeball, Diglett's a mole, Krabby's a crab, Execute is literally just some eggs. I could go on, but Generation 1, stop looking at it with rose-tinted glasses on, it really wasn't that great. Generation 2 was an improvement, but there just wasn't enough for me. Most of what is there though does look great. I really like, for example, Girafarig, Ampharos, Donphan, just to name a few. But for all of those, you then have like Dunsparce, for example, which doesn't look great. So again, kind of hit and miss, but I think they were heading in the right direction, which leads me to Hoenn, Generation 3, in my opinion, the best generation for Pokemon designs. I like every single Pokemon in this generation, except from Medicham. Generation 4, Diamond and Pearl. I like that they brought back older Pokemon that were worthy of a third generation evolution, or like a baby Pokemon, such as maybe Mime Jr. or Munchlax. And then things like Magmortar and Electivire, as I just said, I think look really cool. The new evolutions, I think, for the most part, do look really cool. But then the actual designs of Gen 4 can be a bit hit and miss, although I would say for the most part they're hits. I do like Vespiquen, Drifblim, Lucario and Gastrodon as examples. So yeah, overall not a bad generation. Moving on to number 5 now. Much like with Legendaries, there's a lot to talk about here with Black and White, probably because it was the first game that had a brand new Pokedex from the ground up. You know, it didn't have any Pokemon from any other regions, which made sense given that this was the first game set outside of, you know, a Japan-based land. But it is the most inconsistent generation. Starting with the bad. The elemental monkeys are hideous, I hate all 3 of them. Watchog is gross, looks like it's on some kind of weird drug. Mashana is creepy, Swoobat's weird and creepy. Speaking of drugs, Conkeldurr and Seismitoad look like they've been on steroids. Throw and Sork, why are they wearing clothes? Garbodor is literally just a bag of rubbish. Vanillux, say no more. Klinklang to me looks like Magnemite's weird cousin. What the f*** is Stunfisk? Golurk looks like the Iron Giant. Buffalont looks like Samuel L. Tauros. What the f*** is Heatmore? Okay, I'm glad I got that off my chest. For all of those bad though, you do have some good. Emolga, for example, I think looks really cute and cool looking. Excadrill is just badass. Also, so is Sawsbuck, Scrafty, Crocodile, and my personal favourite of the generation, Volcarona. I think all of those are great, but overall the generation is very, very hit and miss. Moving on to Kalos, Generation 6, I think there's some really weird designs in here, like Aegislash and Barbaracle, almost as if the designers kind of got a bit bored and thought, well, let's just make the craziest things we can come up with and see if they get rejected or not. But then there are some really cool ones, more traditional looking Pokemon, such as Heliolisk, Aurorus and Trevenant. Those 3 are my favourite from Generation 6, so again, kind of not bad. Moving on to Sun and Moon, I think the Alola forms were a nice touch. I really like the Oricorio and how there's a different one corresponding to each island, but overall there's not really a lot that stands out to me from Sun and Moon. There's also a couple that I really don't like, so I'm not a big fan of Crabominable, but yeah, I would just say it's kind of a meh generation. For me, I mean, I said it when I introduced it, Generation 3, Hoenn, Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald, that is the best generation for consistent Pokemon design. Moving on, our final subject is going to be additional features that each generation of game brought up. So starting with Red and Blue, which is kind of difficult to talk about additional features because it is, you know, the base vanilla Pokemon as we know it. So I'm kind of just going to ignore it and say thank you for those games for setting up the franchise that we know and love. Moving on to Generation 2, it added the time system, which was a cool feature, and also Pokemon being able to hold items such as berries, which is now a mainstay. Can you imagine playing a game now and not have a Pokemon holding an item or a berry? It makes it very difficult to go back to Generation 1. Generation 3 introduced double battles, which pretty much set the tone for VGC and competitive play overall. It also introduced abilities and natures, which is another mainstay of the series that is taken for granted. However, Pokemon contests were a bit pointless, as were the secret bases. Generation 4 introduced probably the biggest change of all, with physical and special moves being segregated, as well as status. Now this was something that did exist before, but Generation 4 just made it much clearer and easier to understand. So yeah, not much to complain about there. Generation 5 introduced triple and rotation battles. Both didn't make an impact on the series at all. I don't think there were any triple or rotation battles in Sun and Moon. I could be wrong, but they also had Pokemon musicals in Generation 5, which were just an expansion and contests, and made an equally insignificant splash on the series. Generation 6 introduced Mega Evolutions, which were hated at first, but now people are crying out for their favourite Pokemon to be given these Mega Evolutions. Personally, I quite like them. I think they're cool. And then in Generation 7, we had Z-moves. Z-moves for me are brilliant. I think they add an extra level of depth and variety to the gameplay, especially in a competitive sense, because it's, you know, it's that extra layer of, oh, what item is this Pokemon holding? Is it a Z Crystal? You can find out if it's a Z Crystal with a move like Knockoff, and then if it is a Z Crystal, when are they going to use it? What do I switch into it? Do I protect? The person using the Z Crystal, when do I do it? Are they going to switch? You know, it just adds a whole new layer of gameplay and competitiveness to the game, and I think it's really cool. Which game am I going to say, or which generation am I going to say had the biggest impact? Probably Generation 3. Because double battles, as I said, have just pretty much set the tone for VGC, and abilities and natures are a crucial part to the game that if they were taken away now, it just wouldn't be Pokemon anymore. I do think holding items is an equally big... Oh, this is difficult. Okay, I'm going to give this one both to Generation 2 and 3, just because they kind of set the tone for how the games have played out ever since their release. That brings us to the end of the video pretty much. I am going to say overall that my favourite generation is Generation 3. You could probably guess that from how I've been going in this video. But let me know in the comments what you think. Talk to us on Twitter at TopChatPodcast. As always, thanks very much for listening. Please share with your friends and comment below what you think about Pokemon. Bye for now.